I do kind of question the legitimacy of what's really happening, or is this just a misdirection and a smokescreen for what's really happening underneath? So they can blame the inflation now on Russia. It's crisis to crisis, right? Which keeps everybody off kilter. And what we've been seeing for a couple years now are barren grocery store shelves.
The things nature's going to throw at us is one set of circumstance.
Yes.
But what the government's in this shortage that's coming in, this is a whole different set of circumstance to think about. We rely on the grains so heavily from, what's been set up for the last 70 or 100 years. We never questioned, would it be there next year? Check this out. Many people today struggle to manage their weight, but this is more true than ever after the age of 20, because after the age of 20, our body's metabolism slows down by as much as 4% every decade. By the time we're 50, we've experienced a 10% drop or more in our metabolism. That's a risk to health. That's why I highly recommend adaptwithketo.com. This product works by increasing the ketone levels inside your body, which in turn support boosted metabolism. A scoop a day, I saw improvements for my energy levels while working on the farm. And the best part is I never had to cut out carbs or make other changes to my diet. If you've been looking for a great way to support your weight loss goals, you'll love adaptwithketo.com. Take 51% off for the next 24 hours. adaptwithketo.com, or click on the link in the description box below. And now on with the video. Good afternoon, everyone. This will be one of the most important interviews that you're going to watch through the entire year on timelines. Money and food. Important for both. Keeps your body alive, yet allows you to buy things to be able to prepare for the future. Have with me Lynette Zang, ITM Trading. You can check out their YouTube channel. Incredible amounts of information on where the reset might start, the triggers for the reset, how you want to protect your wealth, and many other things to keep not just generational wealth, but looking far into the future dynastic wealth. So how do you protect during these cataclysmic economic times? And how do you protect during these cataclysmic protein deficient times? Because protein is going to be valuable, as I was told by a very reliable source. Protein is going to be very valuable.
Yeah.
So hopefully today we can throw some ideas back and forth. And I'm just going to preface it by saying we live in a world of cycles. Time is not linear as we've been taught since birth. Cycles return. The world's been based on cycles since time immemorial. That's why the heavens spin, why we have the beginning of a new year, why the zodiac works. Understanding the amplification of solar cycles in terms of centuries, millennia, or even the 12-year solar cycle, 11.7-year solar cycle. So these cycles are built in. The mythologies and science today can prove that we're in cycles. Our solar system revolving around another solar system and another star is also an orbit in itself that can be calculated. Above the ecliptic, below the ecliptic, you know where we sit today, 220 million years in the future, we'll come back to the same exact spot. Those kind of length of cycles have been known, mapped out. So what are the effects on our world here? Do you think these stories of legends of breaths of dragons, maybe they were referencing solar winds, the pouring out of the heavens? Well, maybe that was some sort of effect electromagnetically that caused static electricity to build up in cloud layers and ring out the heavens, literally. So when we go back through myth, legend, prophecy, we come to right this time. I mean, look at these cycles, and that's the way to preface it. But who would have very specific information about the cycles, understand the change of society and civilization was at the crux of time right now? And if you knew that information, would you not try to continue to control power moving through the cycle, controlling, riding on top of a natural cycle to retain power during the collapse moving through? But what about you and I here as the result of all these things that are happening? Fertilizer shortages were inbound here anyway. 13% global fertilizer reduction before the Ukraine, before the Russian crisis. 13% reduction in global fertilizer was already here well before that. And herbicide shortages. which we're going to knock global supply chains of anything grains down about 18 to 20% anyway without Russia. So I think there's a few maskings of causes here. I think it's being more controlled, and especially your control to food. So Lynette, thanks for joining, because I'm curious about the control to money and how we protect ourselves. I'll give some timelines for food, and I'm hoping that you can reciprocate and give some ideas about how you think money is moving and protecting our wealth as we get through both cycles, protein and money.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm happy to do it because you've been very influential on my food development and my property, both down here and also in my bug out house. So yeah, I'm happy to do that.
We see right now, are there really shortages that you think might manifest in the gold and silver market? Because it seems that the silver might not be there. The LBMA not being able to take in Russian gold right now as good delivery from some of the Russian, let's say central or not central bank, but the Russian banks that used to supply, that actually owned the gold mines that were doing the refining and sent it to the LBMA. I mean, there's a lot of pull right now. It seems like a lot of physical delivery, and now there's word that there's not actually the 1,000-ounce silver bars available anymore. I just don't know what to believe or what's on the horizon. I'm getting a bunch of snippets here, there, and everywhere, but I think you know far better than I.
Well, for one thing, just going back to the Russian good delivery, yes, they're not taking the new bars, but they're happy to take the old bars. So, but in anything physical, whether it's food or it's metals, there's a finite amount of it. And so whoever controls that can then thus, perhaps control everybody. I'm hoping that we avoid that by all of this education and people getting prepared with their metals as well as the food. Because what the metals do is they really protect your purchasing power over time, which is why we see central banks accumulating as much of it as possible. And certainly Russia and China, up to this point, have been getting into position for what we're experiencing today. This is probably not a particularly popular thought, but I do kind of question the legitimacy of what's really happening, or is this just a misdirection and a smokescreen for what's really happening underneath? So they can blame the inflation now on Russia. It's crisis to crisis, right? Which keeps everybody off kilter. And what we've been seeing for a couple years now are barren grocery store shelves, while the local farmers are going out and big pharma. Now there's a problem with fertilizer, as you said, and other things. That's why I put in my ponds, actually. So I don't have an issue around fertilizer because I grow my own.
Yeah, we're going to have to take responsibility and in our own fertilizer production, as well as herbicide production and pesticide production. Now, JDAM is a popular method out of Korea that uses all natural ingredients that you might have of things that you would consume in table scraps and be able to compost different types of things you might find in a forest or a mountain setting, whatever that is, to create fertilizers and pesticides. I was wiped out last year with Japanese beetles. We didn't hop on top of them quickly enough, and the orchard gone.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, and the freeze just came in. It was 14 degrees Fahrenheit after everything had bloomed out here, and then 100% of the blooms and flowers dropped off. Luckily today I see a little bit more new growth. The things nature's going to throw at us is one set of circumstance,
Yes.
But with the governments and this shortage that's coming in, this is a whole different set of circumstance to think about. We rely on the grains so heavily from what's been set up for the last 70 or 100 years. We never questioned, would it be there next year?
Right.
So here's the thing. I just a few days ago bought a 490-pound calf from the Amish, and there's an Amish farm not too far from here, but a mile and a half, and they have 500 acres. But when I was there was land that was tilled. I hadn't seen that area tilled before. So I asked, are you breaking this ground here? And all 500 acres are going into production. They're going to grow their own grains because their seed supplier in Ohio told them that they're going to get them the seed possibly, but they're not going to get as much as they ordered originally because they order about 18 wheeler truckload when they bring supplies in. So they're like, okay, this is not sitting well, that their suppliers can't get them the seed they need. 30% of all global exports are from Ukraine and Russia and that whole Black Sea region. That includes Belarus. If you look at it, and the really nitty gritty is Ukraine is not getting their corn seed for planting. So the USDA is coming out and saying, well, maybe Ukraine will knock off by a third the production. But see, that's sort of a fictitious headline with those rosy forecasts they give you. If the seed's not there, they're not going to plant it. So that I don't care what you're going to knock it off of. So then they're going to rely on Brazil, but Brazil relies 85% of the fertilizer from Russia. So then we get into this whole cascading spiral of all this interconnected agricultural business where Argentina suspended exports, Paraguay's down 60% on their soybean crop. There's going to be almost nothing coming out of Russia and Ukraine. We are going into a global, I wouldn't say famine, but the amount of food out there is going to cause panic to the point we've never seen anything like this before. So at what point does the money trail on? Is it going to be the food first and the money second? Or the money food cost first and then the panic second? I'm not sure which way it's going to work.
Well, when you're looking what's happening, they're really running parallel. So we've already entered, even though nobody is talking about this yet, and the 5 and 10 year just inverted, the yield curve inverted, and so that, foretells recession. This is going to be so much bigger than a recession, but I feel like they're paralleling each other because we already have more people hungry, and food insecurity is just growing, and the prices are expanding. And when you're talking about seeds, that is the importance. I've been saying forever, you have to be as self-sufficient and independent as possible, which also means saving your own seeds. I think we have to get very local, and we have to make sure, like you've pointed out, we have to have the ability to control the climates. And I'm putting in those geodesic hot houses in my bug out location, and they're 17 feet high, which means that I'm also going to have the ability to plant trees inside. I'll have some outside as well, but I think that I don't know which is really coming first, because I feel like they're coming at the same time. The system is clearly breaking down. Even looking at this completely dysfunctional stock market where everything physical has been turned into a security. And once it's a security, they can multiply that to make it look like there's a whole lot more than there really is. As you talked about the gold and silver, there's a finite amount of it. And it was already a couple of years ago when we had the silver short that the SLV, the silver ETF, changed their prospectus because they knew they couldn't get enough silver for the basket. So you've got silver, which gets used up in production. There's a finite amount of that, and it's trading at what, $26 an ounce? It's so severely undervalued, secondary monetary metal. And then on top of that, you have central banks accumulating massive amounts of gold. And there's not that much gold out there. So they don't want us to accumulate those things. And so they suppress the price by creating a whole bunch of silver and gold that do not exist, while they themselves, the powers that be, are massively accumulating it. Because whatever little bit of food, medicine, those kinds of things that are going to be available, for the masses, I'm sorry, but we're going to see a massive depopulation. Globally on average, when we go through this, it's about 80% of the population ends up in absolute abject poverty. And a lot of people die, particularly the very young and the very old. But people die because there's just not enough food. And we're already seeing that in too many parts of the world.
Yeah, it's really sad in humanity that we have so much technology and so much interconnectedness and so much wealth, the most wealth ever accumulated on the planet ever. But yet people starve and don't have enough food. I try to rationalize that. How is that even possible? Except for manipulation and control of wealth into a very, 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 very small few hands. The world should not be in any way, shape, or form the way we are in now And I'm not talking in a communist way. I'm going to take your one loaf of bread and give it to somebody else. But that tech should be enough for everybody to be able to produce what they need in the countries for eating. And
Yep.
and the geodesic domes are a great idea. And continuous fruit drop is what you're going to want to look for if you have trees. Like the way we put out the plantation or this fruit orchard out in the front here, got 120 trees. It was for each individual species, which now I know was a mistake to put an early blossoming and early blooming fruit variety that would yield fruit in June in an open setting. But where you're at in an indoor environment, so what you would do is you would take these tree varieties. I'm using plums for an example that would set flower and set blossom very, very early, like now. So it would mature to fruit in June. And then a couple months later, there'd be a whole nother set that would fruit and flower, and they would give you fruit through August. And then there would be a late maturing fruit and flowering that would give you your fruits all the way through, say, late September into early October. And they call it continuous fruit drop, where pretty much from the earliest possible time for fruit and flower all the way through the latest, that you're continuously getting a range of. And now, if you're going to plant outdoor, I would not suggest the early flowering varieties, only go to later or mid. But an indoor variety there, you could just keep spinning the clock on that. You could do that all seasons long in your geodesic grow domes.
Yeah. Although I have done that too on my farm here in Phoenix, where I looked at what was going to be producing, and so I actually planted into that. So I constantly have different, like right now it's the tail end of the grapefruits and orange season, but it's the beginning of the mulberry and peach season. And so, I have done that. We talked many years ago, and I thought, what a good idea to make sure that there was always some fruit, because we are going to have to learn how to eat with the seasons again. And the food is so much healthier when you do that. And, we were talking about pest control, taking the compost, mixing it with the fertilized water. I put in 5 ponds on my property, and I have chickens and I have ducks, and we're putting in some rabbit hatch because, as you said, protein becomes really, really critical. And so I definitely, I think you were one of the first people, I think the second person that I ever interviewed on my channel so many years ago. And that was just a huge influence on how I developed everything. I don't know that I care that. I know the world depends on wheat. I don't really have enough open acreage to do anything like that, but there are things that you can do that'll give you a lot of protein, like quinoa and amaranth and things like that can also add to your protein. And one tree that is probably, if you live in a warm enough climate or you have the ability to take it indoors, I would say that if I only had a choice of one tree to grow, that would be my moringa tree.
Oh, the miracle tree, my favorite too.
Absolutely. I have a hedge, but we are definitely going to be planting that in the domes coming up shortly. They're going under construction starting May 1st, so I'm really excited about that, and we'll be able to get that in place. But like you said, the miracle, it has calcium, it has proteins, it has a bazillion minerals. You could actually live on this, and every single part of the plant is usable and medicinal as well. You talk about, when you're looking at the food, maybe a sub chapter of that is your medicine. And so to put in a medicinal garden and to put in medicinal foods like jujubes are a great medicinal tree. It's a fruit tree. And those dry, so you can also use them for sugar. So I think we have to be thoughtful when we're planting things out, like the moringa seeds also are great to create your own oil, right? So there are a lot of things that we need to do, but it's your health and it's your wealth. And for so long, they have really destroyed the quality of the food that we were consuming. That means that you can't think as clearly and you may miss things that you otherwise would not miss. So for me, it's your health and it's your wealth. And you've got to have gold and silver because that will maintain your wealth part. But you have to have food, water, energy, security, barterability, wealth preservation, community, which is arguably the most important part, and shelter. Because not everybody can do what you've been doing, what I've been doing, but they bring other skills to the table.
I forgot what I was going to say. Must be the food. Anyway.
Well, it's true. I mean, how much nutritional quality, even when they took over organic, right? It used to be an apple looked like an apple that you pulled off the tree, but now when you go into the store, and it's perfect. It's absolutely perfect. Well, that's because of the technology. I mean, they changed the rules in organic, but I like my fruit that I can pick right off my tree much better.
Yeah, and if a caterpillar went in there first, and that's why a lot of old timers had pocket knives, because they would either cut the peach or the apple open first, or if it had a little blemish on it, they just cut right through it and flick it off back in, and then eat right through it. I mean, that's the way as kids we got it too. You picked an apple, there was a hole in it or something, a little blemish on it, that didn't matter, just cut it off.
Right.
But wheat, these kind of really intensive, heavy row crops,
Yeah.
you got to have a machine for that. And the thing about, you mentioned wheat is in a lot of stuff. Well, it's in more
Yes.
products across the planet. Corn,
soybeans, wheat.
Yeah.
I mean, all that processed food has all of those.
Well, here's the thing about the corn this year. The fertilizer shortages that were inbound anyway. And I've done a series of videos. I think I did 3 full-length videos on this particular point alone. I thought it was so important that it was setting the stage for what was coming. And then Russia and Ukraine just got in the way of it. The fertilizer shortage was coming in at 13%. So I asked a few people who really knew about, yields. It came out to basically a 1-to-1, where a 1% decline in fertilizer application in the field resulted in a 1% decline in the yields out of your acreage per bushel on a bushel basis. So a 13% decline meant a 13% decline coming out of the fields. But that was globally. And then you added in the herbicides. And this was kind of that Rubik's Cube that threw me off there for a minute. So herbicides are not created equally. Corn requires mainly glyphosate or Roundup, which I'm not a fan of, because it's grasses mainly that are in the corn rows that are super tenacious, hard to get rid of.
Right.
But yeah, and they didn't have enough glyphosate this year. They're down about 10 to 12%. I think it's running pretty equivalent because they're using the same supply chains for the same chemical inputs. So I was asking about the declines in yields off of not having enough herbicides, and it comes out to a 0.85, almost somewhere in that ratio. So we could either round it up to 1 or round it down to 0.5, whatever it is, it adds on top of the existing fertilizer shortages, because those plants are going to try to uptake the same fertilizer, the same
Right.
nutrients that were put on there. So then you're getting into this downward spiral because you don't have the herbicide inputs, you don't have the fertilizers. And then the USDA was coming out asking farmers to try to mix and match like class 3, class 4, class 23 herbicides to get something similar to glyphosate to run down the rows. So you got all these people out there playing chemistry set that really don't know what they're doing. And it is the amount of global food shortage before this Russia thing was going to be tremendous anyway, tremendous. And I don't know if it's a cover story for it to collapse the economy, because then they can move into their central bank digital currency and all those things we can talk about. But the machines and the corn, there's going to be a lot of products that might disappear because the corn's not going to be coming in. And like I say, Ukraine did not get their corn planting seed. Don't even believe the USDA on the numbers of a third loss. They didn't get the seed to plant. See that, and it'll, as we move forward in the seasons, the numbers should come out and they'll get worse and worse and worse on their projections.
So part of what I'm hearing, so correct me if I'm wrong, is that people need to be really providing their own food and their own sources, because like your wealth, if you are dependent upon the sources from the governments and all of these agencies, then you're going to starve. So you have to be proactive with your health, with your food and your wealth, create your own food source and your own fertilizer source and your own pesticide source, because the other part of that is a healthy plant almost repels, it's kind of like a healthy body repels disease, or at least it makes it a lot harder to get in there. The same thing is true with plants. My sister, who's a master gardener, once told me that a sick plant kind of sends out this almost like a little radar thing. And so the bugs know that these are sick plants and it's easier to attack them. Now, I don't know whether or not that's true because I haven't heard that myself personally, but her onions are like this. So if she tells me something like that, I would have a tendency to believe her. She's been doing it for, well, she's a little older than me and I'm 67, and she started in her teen years. So that gives you an idea of how long. But if you're counting on the system to be able to buy seeds or fertilizer or anything else, or food, period, to feed your family, I think that is a really dangerous position to be in. You need to be, community gardens. I mean, you have to be, I love that you're in a farming community because that community can come together to help. Maybe somebody does dairy, somebody does, wheat and corn, etc. But aren't they saving back their own seeds?
Yeah, they are. And I'm glad you said that because just a few days back, to take a look and going out to the Amish farm to get our calf, in addition to them, tilling and getting ready to plant an enormous amount on the regular, what I was told was, here, I even wrote this down, the amount that they're going to put in their store for sales. Like, you can drive up to their Amish farm and you can go in there and you can, go buy fresh veggies from the farm there. They're going to reduce their sales by 20%, meaning they're getting ready to pull back and prepare and store all that they're not going to put it out for sale. So that should really send a huge signal that they're at the point of, they're the most prepared people on the planet that can get through anything. They don't even live with the electricity. And they're at the point of going, oh, it's gone so far south that we need to pull back and start saving food for ourselves now. So how does that do for farmers markets? Because the farmers are going to be, since in the farming community, they are talking about some of the same things. The petrol's getting really expensive. So they got to drive like 30 minutes up to this farmer's market away from here. And they're going to start saving more, canning, drying, whatever they're going to do. So the new thing is, if you can come out and buy from the farm in bulk, as in farmers market bulk, they don't have to go up to the farmers markets on Saturdays. So you're going to see a swing in availability of what you purchased at the farmers market. The number of people that will be there as vendors, because they would prefer you to come out and bulk buy off their land versus having them to do. So a lot more is going online and getting you out to their physical premise to sell you and load your trunk at their farm, not them coming to you anymore. So there's going to be a gigantic shift in the way food's available for us. So if you're relying on farmers markets, then what? If you're relying on the Amish, then what? But for heaven forbid, the supermarkets close down or need a digital rationing card, some sort of ID facial ration card to go into the supermarket and get your food. I mean, how many steps back are you to knowing your fourth, fifth, sixth source for food down the way now?
I mean, everything's going into rationing, and hey, you can hold it on your phone. So you can hold all your wealth on your phone. You can hold all those cards on your phone, and you can get, then what? I mean, who's in control of you? Because you mentioned earlier, when people are hungry and hopeless, and if the government comes in and says, well, here you go, you may or may not be aware, because there was a big fanfare, I think it was maybe 2019, with the Fed Now accounts, where every single person in the U.S. actually has a direct account, whether you know it or not, you have a direct account with the Federal Reserve. And they did that because it'd be so much easier to just push a button and push the new money into the hands of the population. They won't have to send a check, or they won't have to do a wire. They just push a button and the money is in there. The problem is that the money has no value, because it basically has almost no value now either, and it's losing value more and more rapidly. That's what inflation is. And I love how Lloyd Blankfein is not my favorite person. He used to be the head of Goldman Sachs, and he's just a snake. And he comes out and he says, well, inflation, we can deal with inflation. It's deflation that we can't deal with. Well, if you are very wealthy and or you have you're self-sufficient, then yeah, you can deal with inflation. I mean, I'm having people over for dinner tonight, and about 95% of the meal is right from my gardens because I'm also growing my own meat chickens. So we're having chicken and roasted vegetables and, and salad, and that's all from my farm. So I don't really have to worry too much about it. But we all need to be looking at this seriously so that we are not dependent on the system, because let them come in and say, here, this will save you. And people will be so hungry, so hopeless, so scared that they'll accept it. And then, I mean, you lived in China for quite some time, right?
I
And,
did.
what kind of a hold do the Chinese have over their population?
Complete, to the point of rounding you up and taking you away at any point in time for the wrong word.
For the wrong word. Yep.
Not even the wrong action. Forget the action's way wrong word. You're gone.
So I always felt like China was showing the rest of the world how to 100% completely control their population. And you had mentioned about the rice shortage and those kinds of things. Do you think that's what we're seeing or going to see here?
It is, because if you look at the imports from China, they have about over half the world's everything in the country for food right now, from corn to rice to wheat, soybean. If you look at those charts that have been coming out, I think Goldman Sachs putting out the export figures there. China holds at least half of the world's what has already been harvested and processed bean, corn, and wheat supply in the country. So what is on their side? Why are they buying so much? Well, if you look back, their rice and their wheat crop is getting wiped out at the moment. It'll be some of the headline was like the lowest wheat harvest ever in China. But, their history goes back 4,000 years, and it's hard to, do a direct comparison of what a dynasty looked like back in the Huang dynasty in circa, 2,000, 3,000 years prior, or what the more modern dynasties would look like, 1,000 years ago compared to today. The landmass wasn't the same. The capitals weren't the same. Nanjing was the old capital. You got the warring states and all these things. So to say it's the lowest wheat harvest ever in Chinese history this year, right now, that's a huge statement to say.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, but you understand why they were bringing it in. Like, what they know the cycle too. They know this grand solar minimum cycle that's triggered by electromagnetic effects on the sun that throw the jet streams and the cloud cells out of sync. They know this cycle probably better than anybody, except for maybe the Arab countries, because they had the Arab trade routes going on for so many thousands of years as well. So those two cultures, if you look back in history, have the longest written records and recordings from their travelers going out across what was the known world at that time, which was a good half the globe. I mean, if you go from, let's say, England all the way over to Kamchatka Peninsula and Russia, or all the way down through Indonesia to Australia, that is a vast portion of the planet. So they had records from climatic changes for thousands, plural, of years through those areas. So they know when this starts to happen, that maps up, okay, then they get into these crop losses. And they called it the mandate from heaven. So this is literally what they call it. The mandate from heaven's removed and the emperor has no authority to rule the people anymore. Well, the mandate from heaven was a switch in electromagnetic current coming down, changing our star and what happens electromagnetic field and magnetic fields on our planet. That's exactly what that was in reference to time and time again. Well, it's on a 400-year cycle, the collapse and rise of these empires or dynasties through Chinese history, but they always were so cleanly referencing it came from the heavens first, and that's what. So if you lock our jet streams and our cloud cells really tightly, we get perfect growth seasons, exact plant dates, exact harvest dates. Once those go out the window, and we're seeing what we're seeing now, where late freezes, early blizzards, summer in the middle of winter, winter in the middle of summer, you can't grow crops. And once these cycles are back, you'll know the duration Now who's riding on top of a natural cycle to take advantage of it is the question. 12,000 year cycle, 400-year cycle, whatever. It's a cycle, and it's known in a duration onset period, exit period, and then the deep middle period. So somebody knows this cycle is here again and taking advantage of it. So Chinese are going to continue to buy as much as they can, but Brazil is going to get wiped out because they won't have the fertilizers to produce. And it's going to be a terror show moving up through this May. It will be the recollection that there won't be enough fertilizers to grow what we need for the planet, Northern Hemisphere. Simple math. October is the harvest time. When they look in the fields and go, well, there's nothing out there. Uh-oh, that's going to be terror. And then when they switch to the Southern Hemisphere, when we come into our winter, like, yay, Southern Hemisphere can grow stuff. And Brazil will be like, we're still waiting for the fertilizers. We can't get anything in the ground for y'all. Then what? And then we go through an entire year of no plant or very limited output of Southern Hemisphere and almost nothing out of the Northern Hemisphere. You're going to pay $100 for a loaf of bread?
Oh, that's the thing. If you have $100, they just did a study on how it's not a big problem for the wealthy to weather this higher inflation. No, because they don't have to choose between buying that loaf of bread or putting that tank of gas in their car. But most of the population, these are the choices that they're having to make. And they're having to make them right now, let alone when a loaf of bread does get to $100 a loaf. So is that, you asked what comes first. Is it the food, people being hungry, or the monetary system collapsing? And I'm watching the monetary system collapse as we sit here and speak. And it's patterns. It's always patterns. So you're talking about the long cycle, but I can also talk about the currency life cycles when we go into a government system that collapses. And we're at the very end. The start of it was 1913. The end of it, is it going to be 1923? It could be. We've got so much that's coming up that is supposed to transition then the LIBOR 610 trillion in notional value derivatives, which means who knows how much that really is. That's about to shift. That happens in 2023. It was supposed to happen in 2021 or 2021. And okay, it got postponed because they can't make this shift. So Mike, I have a question for you, David, too, because all of this talk about climate change, when we know that these are the normal cycles, is this about the government getting into position to stay in control, even though what we're really dealing with is a natural cycle?
Oh, 100%, 1,000% yes. It is about control of power and control of the new monetary system as the old one collapses. It's been like, when I really started doing this Adapt 2030 channel and, talking to people like John Casey and writing to Dr. Abudzhamatov over in the Kovar Observatory and trying to really get a lot of feel out there of really how deep are these cycles and are they true and who knows about this and are governments responding? It was more about our governments responding now that they know the cycle is inbound. Because the way it was explained to me, the research I did, global warming as we know it, what started when, back in late 1980s, early 1990s, was a cover story for you, the average person, to see all these changes happening with the extreme storms, the increased floods, the things that don't make sense, the extreme temperatures here, the low temperature, everything falling out of sync of the natural cycle of stability, which we had for 100 years. Well, everybody was used to it. Then there was an excuse for it. People wouldn't get panicked over a global warming thing. Everything was blamed on global warming, but it's run its course. Because if you look at the Greenland ice data coming out from the DMI, which is a Danish Meteorological Institute, just even these last few days, the amount of ice is now above the 30-year running average, which means that for the last year on the 30-year average basis, it didn't decline below that level. And if we look at the global temperatures, this is lower tropospheric temperatures from Dr. Roy Spencer, we're right back down at that 0.0 mark again. So wait a second. I thought we were running away at 1, 2, 3 degrees Celsius. But wait, if you're looking over the 40-year average that they were screaming about the satellites to prove this global warming thing, we're right back to the baseline. And I hope you do your own research. Please go to drroyspencer.com and you have lower tropospheric temperatures there. He runs the University of Alabama, Huntsville satellite data set. I think it's version 6.0 that they're using now. And then Danish Meteorological Institute, DMI, or Polar Portal. You can do both. And then you can take a look at the massive, unbelievable, massive ice gains. They had something go up to like 13.7 gigatons last year. That was off their chart, literally by 1.3 pips above their chart. It pegged at 12 gigatons on a daily gain, but they went up to 13.7 and they never changed it. They still left the chart at 12 and it was literally off the chart. And just a couple of days ago, they got another one that was nearly at the very top of the chart there. So when you start to take a look at the overall averages of everything, it has run its course. Literally, science can prove now that the planet's starting to come back into equilibrium on the cooling. So, if you knew that too, that this was the cycle of the entry of it here, 2021 to 2023 overlaps with your time cycle too. Like, it's too coincidental that the economy and everything being reset and the awareness that the global warming is really not warming anymore and the cycles are out of kilter and we're going into food shortages all in these same years. It can't be just coincidence.
Yeah. It never really is coincidence. It never really is. But we have a choice too, right? I mean, we don't have to allow the full takeover, but people need to be aware. And that's the biggest challenge. That's the biggest challenge that you and I face are people, the awareness and then the belief. And then, of course, you have to do something about it.
So can I ask you a couple questions? Finance?
Absolutely. Oh, 100%. Yes.
Okay. So the headlines coming out that Saudi Arabia will now take yuan for oil, and there's going to be some new refineries built that are going to be specifically Russian oil filled, exported to China, all paid for in yuan outside the dollar on that end of things. But you talked about the derivatives unwind here. So, with all the banking lockups and the sanctions and things, there's going to be a lot of missed payments. So
Yes.
how does that default, when it comes out on a derivative default, I mean, the money has to be pulled back in somehow, but I mean, it doesn't seem like it's really affected or affecting the economy at the moment. So you can talk about derivatives fallouts, but I just don't see anything in the real world happening. So I just don't understand that part of how it works.
Well, because it's really hidden, and it's the ASID or ASDI that actually controls whether or not something is deemed a default. So we wouldn't necessarily see it until they lose control of it, until it gets too big. And I think that, what you were talking about in Saudi Arabia with taking the yuan is a clear indication. I mean, I think you only get to use this card one time, that if you as a government, you don't like what somebody else is doing, well, the US, boom, with the SWIFT system, which is the global payment system, they just cut you out. And now you've got the NATO allies and even Switzerland, that's supposed to be neutral, starting to step into line. You will do what we want, except that now you've really got two big factions. And I think that what we're already in, and I think it's staged, but I think that what we're already in is a World War III, right? Because we've been watching since 2008, we've been watching a globally coordinated central bank movement, whether it's deflation, inflation, reflation, whatever. But you're seeing too many coordinated moves, and now all of a sudden these moves are going in the opposite direction, and it justifies the inflation, doesn't it? So, we've been witnessing the rise in financial power of the East and the decline in the West, but that would certainly, I liken this to kind of a bridge that's in a storm and it's swinging back and forth and it's swinging back and forth. And with every swing, it just gets weaker and weaker and weaker until the whole system collapses. And the derivatives, it's, look, Warren Buffett, not my favorite person either, but he did mention that derivatives were financial weapons of mass destruction. And when you look at the patterns of financialization, in other words, the whole world, and they really started in the 80s once President Nixon gave full control of inflation to the central banks. But all of these products have been turned, physical products have been turned into financial products that then can be leveraged. And that's the derivative. A derivative is derived from something that's real, okay? Derivatives, silver derivatives, gold derivatives. Before they changed the accounting method, for every 1 physical ounce of gold that exists, there were 62,000 ounces of derivative gold. And so it's worse now. I guarantee you, it's way worse now, but it's buried under their formulas. They can keep that going and floating, and they can keep it invisible until they can't. And that's the point that we're getting to. Because if you've got 610 trillion notional, and whenever you hear anybody say nominal or notional, what you're really hearing, what they're really saying is that this is only what you see on the surface. It's not really the truth that's at risk. So 610 notional derivative contracts with an average, according to, I think, the IMF or the BIS, an average contract with 1,000 times leverage. What happens when they try to take it from one interest rate benchmark to another interest rate benchmark? They ran a test with 80 trillion, and that was in 2020. And it was a big October, and it was a big fat fail. We knew they were running the test, and then it went dead silent. And about 3 weeks after the test, they came out and they said, yeah, we're postponing this until 2023. They can't do it, because the other big piece of that is that if you're looking at one benchmark and you're going to convert all these contracts with valuation against that one benchmark to contracts against a different benchmark that reads different, that means the valuation of that contract is going to be different. And that matters to all of the banks and the non-financial institutions, non-bank financial institutions that create this garbage, sell this garbage, and whether you realize it or not, if you're investing in mutual funds, ETFs, any of that stuff, futures contracts, right? I mean, this is your exposure. And what a great excuse for the retirement crisis that we're also in, right? Well, when the markets implode, and they will go up before they implode, but they will implode, you know, what a great excuse, because who are you going to call? Who are you going to complain to? And then they give you the digital wallet, which we all have, big fanfare, and now you don't hear anything about it, not because we don't have it in place, but because they're not ready for you to realize that it's in place. And now you're desperate and you accept anything that the government wants you to accept, or you're cut off because you're not self-sufficient, because you are dependent on the food system and on the financial system. Now, that's a place I'm glad I'm not.
Is there a point where we'll ever see a default on the metal deliveries to the point where the public will find out that there's not enough metal? I mean, what would the trigger be that, okay, we just don't have the metals anymore? We really are in a deficit where we can't deliver and there's really not enough. And what you're seeing out there was an illusion. And we really only have about 2 ounces of gold left for the demand for an entire industry behind here. And we just can't, all those guys are under sanctions over there. The mines are closed over there. There's war over here. We can't melt. At what point does it come to the real to the head where they find out there's a shortage on it?
When it becomes too expensive to maintain the illusion. And we just kind of got a taste of that over at the LME with the nickel.
Yeah, that was huge.
It is huge because, and they've been glitching ever since. So they cannot get it back together again. And what that does is it's a loss of confidence. And these things can all stay in place as long as There is confidence in the system because it's all a house of cards. So, when you ask me, are we going to know? Sure we are, just like we're going to know that there's a shortage of food. And also what happens with all of those financial instruments when they do implode, or the money, we go into the hyperinflation. Now, when will that happen in earnest? Well, I feel like we're at the beginning of it, no doubt about it. This is not transitory. When you look at energy prices, oil prices back above $100 a barrel again, and you will see this when it becomes too expensive. Because what we've also been experiencing, and this is a big key, it's part of the pattern. Those that do know, like you mentioned China, and we could also mention the wealthy, those that are part of this understand what's happening. And they are shifting out of intangibles into tangibles, into gold, into silver. Are these coming back on the market? Nope, I'm not selling mine. At least not at this point. There will come a point when it will be time to convert them into other income producing assets. But for the moment, when I buy, I just buy. I am not selling. And you'll find that a lot of people at the top, that's actually what's happening. They're getting out while the getting's good, just like we've seen every single time, right? Those that know, they get into position. China is getting into position. Russia was getting into position for this eventuality that we're dealing with now. But yeah, as long as it is not too expensive and the people that matter to the system still have time, but once they have repositioned themselves, then let it collapse.
Because right now you're seeing the Canadian Mint saying that, at the bare minimum, you're looking at 3 to 6 weeks out. A lot of places ordering online saying we're completely out of stock, or it's just a pre-order. If we can even get the silver to run some sort of minting, and that's on the base level of somebody buying from just what's so-called Main Street buying. But the signals are getting out there that, wait, why is all the silver disappearing from where you and I could buy literally just online or going in to a store? And a lot of physical stores have been closing too.
Right.
Heaven forbid you can't go into a government office and complain anymore because they're all closed because of COVID. So they see how they transitioned everything online. So now where's all the silver? It disappeared completely from your and I grasp almost. I mean, not yours, obviously, because you're still at the wholesale level, but somebody who wants to buy out there. I mean, what's the deal with that disappearance of everything suddenly? Out of stock on everything, not going to get it back, too bad?
Well, that is really what happens. I mean, I think that ITM, we are really fortunate because we've been in business since 95 and we have very deep relationships with wholesalers. So, and please understand that this is not the area that I work in anymore, so I can't really speak to the day-to-day availability. But what I can tell you is that a lot of things that we used to be able to get easily and readily, like you said, they're simply not available anymore. So for me, when I'm building my metals portfolio, I want to look at function. What am I trying to accomplish? If I'm bartering, as example, if it's about bartering and making sure that I can put a tank of gas in my car regardless of the price of it, then I want silver and I want it in different sizes. Well, fortunately, I built my portfolio when it was easy to get all of those fractional pieces, etc. Now, I don't think it's as easy to do that. And the same thing with gold. There are all different kinds of gold. People will go to, I find this interesting, and I know that I'm quite unique in this perspective, but I go from my personal experiences that I've lived through because that's what I can trust. I don't care about hopium. I care about reality. And when I'm looking at gold, personally, I only buy collectible gold. Why? Because I had an uncle that was a major antique dealer, and when I was about 10 years old, he showed me 2 huge floor safes in his home, and that would have been 1964, when it was illegal to hold more than 5 ounces of gold. And he probably had at least 3,000 ounces in there in the legal way. And he did it legally because they were pre-1933 and our government had confiscated gold. And when you go back to all of the wars, the Civil War, the War of 1812, the Revolutionary War, and then again, I mean, as we were transitioning into this perpetual central banking era, they confiscated gold. And they had to, because that's how they fund the wars. And we've been in a perpetual state of war since 1989. So people go, oh, they wouldn't do that again. Well, then you're living on hopium. I want to be, just like I want to be connected to, I want to make sure that I can get all the food and everything that I need, but I want to make sure that I can hold my wealth. And when people say, oh, well, I just wouldn't give it to them, I want the kind of gold that I can go out and buy other assets with. So therefore, I want the kind that would still be legal if the other is not legal. And I can't guarantee either one, but I don't know. If it's happened the same way every time and we're doing the same thing, expecting anything else is hopium. And that doesn't really work very well for me personally.
Yeah, I was just thinking, imagine the rad pieces he had, because if you're talking about pre-33 gold in 1950, which is a 20-year difference, versus pre-33 gold, which is 90 plus years now, imagine the pieces 70 years old would be into the 1800s back then. Like, they must have been the most opulent, unbelievable, unfindable, amazing gold in that collection. You're going back that far.
Oh boy, I know. I wish. But he had 2 sons, so I didn't get any of that. But yeah, that would, if I knew then what I know now, but that was my training ground. Right? I mean, when I'm 10 years old, yes, when he said to my parents, if anything happened to me, Aunt Bertie will be well taken care of for the rest of her life because of what's in these 2 safes. So of course I turned around and I looked. You couldn't put one more coin in there, not one. And he would go into very high-end, he was a high-end antique dealer, so he was going into high-end homes and, probably buying them for $35 an ounce, maybe $50 an ounce. I mean, buying them for nothing.
That overlaps perfectly, because these grand solar minimums, there's really been no society that's survived through this on the reset of the economy, the government,
right,
and the population migration. So when he's talking about the same thing where, they every time they confiscate gold, well, I'm saying the same thing. Every time we hit this grand solar minimum period, we have a severe reset and everything falls apart, but it's assembled under a new fashion. So let me ask you about, some PAMP, let's say you have a PAMP 1 kilogram silver bar. Now, is it going to have more value if you have the SA certificate that matches up with the numbers on it versus going in to sell it with somebody with a number bar like that with the SA certificate? Does that give it more value, or is it just I could get a 1 kg bar from somebody else, or a 20 or 2 10-ounce bars? And like, during these times of reset and monetary duress, will it have any extra value by having the SA certificate with you to show that, yes, indeed, there's a QR code on it, has a number, it was from PAMP itself, they weighed it out and all this goodness? Or is it just Wild West? I'll take anything anything you have in hand, I'll trade for it.
Well, I think what the certificate does is it guarantees its authenticity. But I also think that during that period of time, I think that if you look at what's happening in Venezuela right now in the outskirts, where they are actually pricing food and everything else, haircuts, everything in terms of gold, right? So their gold and silver have, gold particularly has a specific weight, and gold and silver have specific qualities. So while that would be an easier thing if you've got your certificate of authenticity and, of course, this is embedded in there, it's the same kind of thing where it guarantees that it is what it is, then it's easier to transact. But I also think I'm not as concerned about confiscation around silver as I am around gold. So I don't mind silver in any form, including, let's see, where's my Here it is, including a sterling silver chopstick, right? Because it's easy enough to test it. And that's the other thing that people need to realize is that gold and silver in any form is monetary at its base. So if I needed to just cut a piece of this chopstick up, I'm not going to care, right? Aunt Bessie's sterling silver, it's 92% pure. So, you know, for me, since I've been accumulating for so long, I have a lot of flatware, you know, and salt and pepper shakers and all of that kind of stuff because it's still silver. Mexican silver is 92.5% pure again. So the certificate makes it easier to transact, but I definitely do believe that silver and gold in any form, people will have test kits. They will be able to transact with that, like we're seeing in Venezuela. They just weigh it out, they test it, they weigh it out, and you have a transaction.
That is going to be a different world when you go to your farmer's market, have to get a silver test kit or something. And I'll take how much for the spoon, Lynette? All right, I'll trade you 2 oranges for that one. Let me test it first.
But think about this. Everybody's got computers. Everybody's got scales. So it may kind of seem, and the test kits, you know, I don't know how much they are now, but they're not exorbitantly expensive. And I guarantee you they're going to want to take this or even this over this once hyperinflation hits. That's what happens, right? You can't replace the goods and service. So a vendor cannot replace the goods and services for the amount of these pieces of paper or even digits in you know, in an intangible fashion. So they would, they'd much rather have physical silver, physical gold, because they know that it holds its value more. And it may be hard for a lot of people to realize that now, but go ahead and look at Venezuela. Go ahead and look at Zimbabwe. You know, I mean, we have current examples of it. Current. So we're not talking about 100 years ago. We're talking about today in these different countries, how people are transacting, really transacting with primarily gold, but also secondarily silver. And see, silver gets used up in manufacturing. Gold does not, which is really why gold is the primary currency metal and what they reset a currency against. Because even though we've been taught that this is an old relic, well, really? Then why are you accumulating so much of it? And the reality is both gold and silver have the broadest base of buyer. So where we're talking about manufacturing and those other things, both gold and silver are used globally in every single sector of the economy. They have the broadest base of buyer. What do you want in a crisis? That's what you want. Something where there's only a buyer in one sector. You've got the most narrow. So if they don't want to buy, you're SOL.
And how many ounces of silver per missile? I was seeing it was like 500 ounces per missile in some of the U.S. Armory bits and pieces there. They're doing just fine. Hey, so let me I want to try to wind up here, but I had a
26 bucks and it's 26 bucks an ounce, right?
Times 500. That's just in the missile components. Cause you know, you look at the electrical conductivity, that extra 1 millisecond faster than copper on those guidance systems. And that's why they want to use that. Now gold, I guess, was too prohibitively expensive. Because, you know, 500 ounces in a missile, I mean, geez, what would the price be if it was gold wiring in there versus silver? That'd be almost unbuyable. All right. So last question.
I'm sorry. One more thing. Not when you have this. Unbuyable.
I need one of those. Well, was that for a can of tuna?
Pretty much.
Yeah, that's really not being joking, but the price, you know, if you read some verses in the Bible talking about you're going to work a day's wage, or the full day's wage for a loaf of bread. I mean, that's really no joke. That's kind of where we're going. And you think about the average person, how much would they make per day? You come down into, you know, if you're going to average across, you know, developed nations, would be $100, $200 a day. And that, you know, at that price of wheat or barley, oh, whoa, at that point you starve because you can't eat just bread. You're going to need other things too. And currency reset is my thing. Because, some of the people in Venezuela were also using cryptocurrency on the border here, but a very selective amount would still barter in cryptocurrencies. Now, here's my thing. Carbon credit trading is sort of based on a cryptocurrency validation and input, but could this be possible? Yes or no? And this is, I'm going to state the question to you here. If you were to, this all based around carbon credit, and I know the price they want to go to is $200 per one carbon credit. The current trading price is around $8. So the new world that we're entering, or maybe this will be a new monetary base, at least one of the pillars of the new monetary system beyond gold and silver. Now with carbon credits, if you remove everybody from the land or portions of land and you set across and you use surveying and you mark it out 100 acre by 100 square acres, I guess, if we want to call that, you can get the density of trees in there, and then you can use LiDAR and you can get a density of species, average density. You can know how much each tree would sequester, and then you could use that as a solid asset base, knowing the value of it for at least 20 years. But there would be no human intervention in that, because the minute you cut tree number one, like you're talking about with the derivatives, you cut tree, then the value of that investment is no longer the value of that investment, meaning that you would need to remove people and keep them out of certain sections of the world, the United States, off of forest land or whatever. You digitize forests. The new stable coin will be the forests that are digitized as the base for the carbon credit system, as long as they can keep people out, and then they can do their average CO2 sequestration on tree species basis. So would that be a possible thing to do as a new leg of the new economy after this reset comes in? Does that sound like fanciful, or is that even possible?
Well, I mean, look, I don't know about where you are, but I can tell you right now that most of the building that's happening here in Phoenix is multifamily, so apartments. So I think that they will attempt to do that. And I was actually talking to a friend of mine in Canada just the other day, and they said that the carbon credits started at like $2, and now, I could be wrong about this, but I'm pretty sure she told me it was up to $20. So I think that they'll definitely do it, because it's all about control. And if they can control certain areas, I mean, what has lasted in families, dynastic wealth that I like to talk about, that's lasted in families for over 300 years. The minimum is 300 years, and real estate would be one of them. So to make sure that the few were really owning all of that real estate, I can see it, and I can, here's the thing too, David. I've tried to figure out what foundation they would use to create new money. Like in the fiat system, it's debt, right? So, but that's not real either. You can grow, you mentioned about all the wealth, how much wealth there is out there, but the reality is that wealth never disappears. It just shifts location. And so the goal is to have it shift away from the many to the few, and they've been very, very successful. Could they base the new monetary system on those carbon credits? Yeah, they could. They can do anything that they want, because all I've been able to find so far is that they plan on basing the new money on debt. But what that actually also means is that they're going to have to wipe out all of the debt that they already have in place, because it's at nosebleed levels, in order to start the new system. So that would make a whole lot of sense, because you've got value in the real estate and value in the trees that are on the real estate that clean the air and do all sorts of other wonderful things. And, and we need them. Could they use that as a new monetary system, as a foundation? Yeah, they could. Yeah, they could.
So where does that leave you then? You mentioned something really important. So the debt reset. Now, what if I have my house, my land, my farm, my car? I have no debt, zero debt whatsoever. The only thing I have is property tax, which you
Yep.
talk at great length about holding
Yep.
metals to be able to exchange for property tax. So
Yep.
if you're completely debt free and they reset the debt, is your property and home still in danger of confiscation, even though you're debt free and you don't owe anything on the properties?
The only reason why, if as long as you can pay those property taxes, if you own everything free and clear, that's your biggest danger. And so that's the importance of having gold, to make sure that you can always pay that. Because what they do is they put you in crisis. Like, think back to what happened in 2008, and people were in crisis and they were panicked, and so they restructured all those mortgages, right? But whose benefit were those mortgages restructured to? Not the person that was borrowing the money, but the lenders of that money. So I think that that hierarchy is going to get more and more concentrated, like it has over the years. There's been a massive consolidation in those at the top. But that would be, you just need to be able to maintain that, because most people don't own their property outright. So they have debt attached to it. Now, if you have debt attached to it, that's another function of the gold, because the price has been so, both gold and silver, so ridiculously suppressed. And when they reset the currency, they do it against gold. It takes something that has no real value against something that is all intrinsic value. And then you'll see gold expressed somewhere near its fundamental value. So if you're holding it and you have a mortgage, then you can capture some of those gains, turn it into the funny money for a second, and pay that mortgage off. So I don't want anybody to panic if they are not in that circumstance, as long as you can build your portfolio and enable yourself to pay it off. Because if you can't, or if things get really bad, and you are not self-sufficient and independent, then you have to take whatever they're willing to give you. Whatever the plan is, you're going to go along with it because you don't have any choice. So it's not as in, so real estate, if you own it outright, as long as you can pay your property taxes and you are self-sufficient so that you are not dependent on their systems, then you can maintain your wealth. You can even grow your wealth. There's an opportunity in there.
Yeah. So one last thing here. So that microcosm of time to be able to swoop in when the hyperinflation is happening, take the metals and pay off. You talked at length about, different resets through history, and that's what you study. Mm-hmm. Is the downfalls of money and the restart of new systems. Like, that's always usually that system in between falls really quickly again, and then they come up with something eventually in the future. But what's the signal going to be, and the timing? Like, really, in realistic terms of time, once you see the hyperinflation start, you see all these things happening in the markets. Do you have 2 months, 1 month, 3 months to be able to get your metals turned into cash, to be able to then pay down that note, own your house? But then how do you get that physical paper? Because, I talked to my banker, because I was trying to just game these out on an exit scenario to be able to do exactly what you're saying. But they're saying, well, sometimes it'll take up to 6 weeks to clear it, and it takes this long for the paper and that long. So when you go in there and pay, and then maybe they'll say, well, default, no, we didn't want to take that, and you still owe. So how do you even get that free and clear from your bank the instant you pay that off? Because there's still a huge lag time between exiting and paying off in full. I just paid off my truck and I'm still waiting. It's been like 2 weeks and I still don't have the paperwork in my hand to show that I have zero obligation on that truck and I'm free and clear. So, there's a couple different aspects moving forward: the trigger that it would be, the time of that, and then, getting with your bank to say, give me that on paper that I'm clear off the mortgage as well.
Well, that's a really good question. I would say, honestly, on average, you have 3 overnight resets. Now, it could be more than that. I don't think it's going to be less than that, since this is a global issue. I think that you want to get it paid off in the first one, because by the time you get to the third one, everything is, you just won't have any options left. So when we see that reset, that's when you go in and pay it off. And I think part of it, with all the technology that we have, even if you don't have that paper in your hand, as long as you have proof that it's paid, because most people won't. Most people won't be able to do it. So I don't know that it's official once you get your paperwork, or it's official once you get the payoff amount and you pay it off. Right? Because once they give you that amount and you actually submit the funds, then the interest and everything stops. So you just need to make sure that you have absolute proof of that, even if it takes a while for the paperwork to come through.
Yeah, that's
And I
right. It
would
was
do
like,
I'm good.
call us and we'll give you the exact payoff amount to the minute when you send in the funds, right? And then that transfer completes. And then it was from that point, there would be a lag and a delay to actually get, like when you buy the house, you get everything. And I want that physical paper because if there's a collapse of computer systems, they're like, no, we don't have it. Well, I want, I'm just old school, in the hand, the physical. If you don't have it, if it's not in your hand, you don't own it. So true.
It's
It could be
true.
with
If you don't own
fertilizers,
it, you
food,
don't
or
own
metal.
it. Absolutely. But I would also say with today's technology, as long as you have that documented, I mean, you can take pictures of the whole thing so that you can have that fully documented that you paid that off. That's the way to go.
Well, Lynette, you're using Photoshop. I just don't believe it. Where's the physical paper with the bank stamp on it? You know what I mean?
Not much is physical these days, but yes, I like those mortgage documents all paid off. I agree with you on that one.
All right. Well, any last thoughts? We've had a row conversation here for a fair bit. And any thoughts you'd like to throw out for anybody here?
You know,
I'll put the links in any way, people who really want to talk to you, because I'm sure there's a line a mile deep down. Oh, who was that? I really want to, learn more and talk to her about. So,
yeah,
last
absolutely.
thoughts.
Really, I think people think they have all the time in the world until that time is done. Can I even tell you how many people say, exactly when is this going to happen? Now, you are much better at that because you've got all of those charts and this data. But I think it's from a currency collapse circumstance, it's a little more challenging to know exactly the moment. So the time to get ready is before you need to be ready. I can't even tell you how grateful I am that you and I met years ago, but that I also started on this journey. Like 2010 was when I bought this property here and started putting in my food and my water. And then when I met you, I put in the indoor grow space and, to get ready, because the time to do it is now. So if anybody's out there procrastinating, stop procrastinating. That's probably the biggest thing, and it doesn't matter what anybody else says. Do what feels right to you to do, and don't worry about anybody else that is not paying attention, because this is not the time to stop paying attention. This is the time to get ready. That's what I would really like to say.
Yeah. And how many of us have experienced that where you're trying to push forward and then somebody's grabbing you by the shirt and going, no, no, it's not that bad. Nothing's going to happen. Really. You're
Are you
just thinking too
crazy?
much. You're
That
watching
can
too much
never
news. You're doing,
happen. Mhm.
it happens a lot. So at these times, it really is at the very end. We have 2 months left before the realization of the fertilizer shortages is here. I'm just wondering if the news is going to run with it also, to create the
Probably not.
artificial panic and create the artificial shortages, because the supply chains will not catch up at the state they are now. If we go into a panic buy, they will never catch up, at least in this iteration of time. And I'm wondering if it'll be an artificial panic run, because they did the thing with the toilet paper. And you saw, I went to Costco at those times, and there was how many people had toilet paper in their carts based on the news? I was the weird one that had all food in my cart. And I'm looking all around, all these people are carts are full of toilet paper, and they're looking at me, who's this weird guy buying food? He needs to buy toilet paper. Yeah. I just don't know
I
how it's
had
going to.
lots of toilet paper. I was able to share a lot of toilet paper. For some
Yeah.
reason, that toilet paper seems to be a great tool of barter. People really, and it's not just that it happened. If you listen to my videos from years ago, I'd say toilet paper, for goodness sakes. So
Yeah.
you
Again,
can
in
use
the
the link.
hand. It's in the hand. It's a barterable.
It
Lynette,
is
thanks so
barter.
much for your time. Thanks so much for your time. Again, last thing, how can people contact you if they want to chat more?
Well, I have a YouTube channel, and so if you go into YouTube, you can either put ITM Trading or you can put Lynette Zang and I'll come up. We're also on, okay, so we're on Rumble, BitChute, and Odyssey as well. Or they can go to our website, itmtrading.com, and we're here to be of service.
All right, thanks so much. And I'll put the links in the description box below. So if you don't want to actually type it in the browser bar, you can just click and go. I'll do you that favor. Everybody, thanks for watching. Hope you got something out of our conversation. And the weekend's coming up. Please do something this weekend to get yourselves ready. This is the real deal. It's not going away, and it's amplifying, and it'll be here so lightning fast. By the time you blink your eyes, your food prices will have doubled or tripled, and you're going to be limited on what you can buy in the stores.
Oh yeah, get growing.
All right. Bye.